lesson for us today as well. That this struggle is for all of us and not just people who are directly affected by having their children in the Chicago public schools.
Tim just told me to move closer to the mic. I wanted to follow up on something Tim said. October 22nd, Freedom Day 1, important, very happy to see it immortalized in this film. But there is Freedom Day 2 that we really ought to talk about because of what Freedom Day 2 really signified in terms of the struggle. One of the things that we have to think about whenever we think about Chicago is this long, long history of Black struggle, Black organizations trying to make Chicago a better place for people to live. So that we were the inheritors of the legacy of the labor movement. Certainly many of the people who were involved in working around the schools were people who had come out of the labor movement, particularly the packing house workers were extremely, extremely helpful in training people and in getting people involved so that when they came to the civil rights movement, they already had some understanding of how you organize. The other wonderful thing about what was going on in 1963 was that it was a wonderful coming together of the Southern and Northern movements. There's a fantastic picture somewhere of James Foreman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Bill Berry, the head of the Urban League, and Arthur Brazier. And so in this moment, there's a very, very powerful movement going on in the South, particularly on the Black campuses, where SNCC did a lot of its organizing, the organizing around the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And so all of that really came together. You heard people singing freedom songs that came out of the Southern movement. Those freedom songs, many of them taken from the labor movement. And so there is this process, this long process of struggle, which then in February of 1964 culminated in Freedom Day 2. And if there was a strong coalition that produced Freedom Day 1, by Freedom Day 2, all of the coalition had begun to organize itself around very, very different issues, as the city made it very, very clear that if we were going to continue to take kids out of school, if we were going to continue this fight, they were going to do everything that they could to destroy the movement. Now, not as many students stayed out on Freedom Day 2, but Freedom Day 2 is extremely important because it represents this continuation of the process. It represented that people were not prepared to stop struggling until they achieved their objectives. And the wonderful thing about today is looking out here and seeing all these people. There are a whole lot of people who are still prepared to keep struggling, and we certainly need it.
Today, which is where we're going to go with our next two speakers. I'm going to ask Jason Perez from the Black Youth Project to talk to us a little bit about the ways in which young Black people are continuing this struggle today.
Hello? Yeah. All right, now that works. Yeah, my name is Jason Perez. I'm with the Black Youth Project. I guess, what I first wanted to, bring up and lift up is, first of all, I'm 32 years old, and I'm a parent to a 10-year-old who attends the Chicago public school at this time. And before I talked to her, I made sure I checked in with her in regards to some of her major issues, So, and so for my daughter Nisa, her biggest issue, she goes to Brenneman School in Uptown, off of Clarendon, and her biggest issue is that she always has to be quiet during lunchtime, and And then the other issue is, of course, food, which is like I can never send her to school and actually expect her to eat that food. I always have to buy her separate food. And then the other issue is the separation of, like, you know, the neighborhood schools versus, quote unquote, like those other good schools that Nisa in 5th grade now already is looking towards in regards to high school and cares about those kind of things instead of looking at neighborhood schools as a place for her to actually be educated in. So, and I brought those things up just to kind of, for me, you know, I'm a high school dropout from Chicago Public Schools, and I'm also formerly incarcerated. And I know for me growing up, and when you look at the majority of the work that's going on locally today, is you know, some of the biggest issues are the school closings definitely had an impact, but it's definitely, at least in my opinion, is the school to prison pipeline.
Yes.
And you see that nationally, and you also see that very much so locally. And what you also, and also the bigger issue is police inside of schools and actual cells inside of schools. And that basically, especially once you get to high school, that's the main thing that you're looking at. That's the main thing that you're concerned about. Especially if you know, meet the fate that, you know, quote unquote, I did in terms of actually going to a neighborhood school. So, you know, the few organizations I do want to lift up, certainly Voice, Fly, folks that you saw up there, which is now called the Chicago Student Union, and of course COCO, who had always been doing holistic work around Chicago public schools in terms of stopping school closings, but also making sure that once we stop the schools from closing, that we actually have schools that kids actually want to attend, and that kids actually have some sort of, that the community has democratic say in, and that kids actually have democratic say. So I think I think moving forward though, it's something that has to somehow get discussed or be contextualized with the larger issues around funding for schools, is the school to prison pipeline, and how our schools have become a place where kids start encountering the police at levels that are just, you know, not good for them. So that's all I got.